The Grand Assembly Hall on Nexus Prime was the largest structure ever built by intelligent life. It stretched for miles in every direction, with seats carved from stone and metal and crystal to fit the bodies of 847 different species. Today, every seat was filled. Today, the galaxy would decide the fate of millions. Daniel Morrison stood at the human delegation's platform and looked out at the sea of alien faces. Some had scales. Some had feathers. Some had no faces at all, just clusters of eyes or sensory organs that humans could barely understand. He had spent 30 years learning to read these beings, to understand their politics and their fears. But today, something felt wrong. "The vote will now commence," announced the Zelkari High Speaker. The Zelkari were tall and thin, with pale blue skin and 4 arms. They had led the assembly for 300 years. Their voice echoed through translation devices in every language known to the galaxy. "The matter before us is the Varth expansion crisis." Daniel felt Laura Bennett shift beside him. Beside him. She was his deputy, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. Before she became a diplomat, she had spent 15 years in military intelligence. She noticed things that others missed. "Something is wrong," she whispered. "Look at the Zelkari delegation. They already know how this vote will go." Daniel looked. She was right. The Zelkari representatives were calm, almost bored. In a vote this important, that made no sense. The Varth Dominion had been conquering worlds on the outer rim of the galaxy for 2 years now. They were a warrior species, brutal and efficient. The worlds they took were home to peaceful beings who had no armies, no weapons, no way to fight back. Millions had already died. Millions more would follow. Humanity had proposed a simple solution. Form a coalition. Send ships. Protect the innocent. It was what humans had learned to do after centuries of their own bloody wars. When evil rises, good beings must stand against it. "The human delegation has proposed military intervention," the High Speaker continued. "We will now hear arguments." One by one, the great powers of the galaxy spoke. The Morthani said intervention would be too expensive. The Chelic said it would anger the Varth and bring war to their own worlds. The Fennec said it was not their responsibility to protect species who could not protect themselves. Daniel listened with growing horror. These were the same arguments humans had made before their own great wars. These were the words of cowards and fools. When it was his turn to speak, Daniel stood slowly. "Friends," he said, "I have heard your concerns, but I must remind you what is happening while we debate. Children are being torn from their parents. Cities are burning. Entire cultures are being erased. The Varth do not want territory. They want domination. And if we do nothing today, they will not stop at the rim. They will come for all of us, one by one, until there is no one left to stand against them." The hall was silent. Daniel could see delegates shifting in their seats, uncomfortable with his words. Then the Zelkari High Speaker raised one of their 4 hands. "Before we vote, there is information the Assembly must receive." A holographic display appeared in the center of the hall. It showed a document covered in official seals from a dozen major species. 6 months ago, the High Speaker said, the major powers of this Assembly signed an agreement with the Varth Dominion. In exchange for favorable trade terms and a guarantee of non-aggression, we have agreed to recognize their authority over the Outer Rim territories. The hall erupted in noise. Smaller delegations shouted in anger. Larger ones sat in satisfied silence. Daniel felt his heart turn to ice. "We were not informed of these negotiations," he said. "Humanity was excluded." "Humanity is a young species," the High Speaker replied. "You have been members of this assembly for only 40 years. It was decided that your emotional nature might complicate the process. Lara grabbed Daniel's arm. Her face was pale with fury. "They sold those people," she whispered. "They sold millions of lives for trade deals." Daniel looked around the hall. He saw the truth now. This vote had been decided before it began. The great powers had made their choice in secret, and they had left humanity out because they knew humans would never agree. "The vote will now proceed," the High Speaker announced. "All in favor of non-intervention in the Rim territories." The numbers climbed on the display. 600. 612. The great powers and their allies voting to abandon the innocent. All opposed. 235. Humanity and the smaller species, the ones who still remembered what it meant to be weak and afraid. "The motion passes," the High Speaker declared. "The Assembly will take no action regarding the Varth expansion." Daniel stood frozen. Around him, delegates began to talk among themselves, already moving on to other business. For them, this was just another vote. For the beings on the Rim, it was a death sentence. Lara touched his shoulder. "Daniel, what do we do?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to Kevin Shaw, the head of their security detail. "Contact the ship. Tell Captain Collins to prepare for immediate departure." Kevin's eyes widened. "Sir?" "We're leaving." Daniel straightened his jacket and looked toward the High Speaker's platform. "But first, I have something to say." He pressed the button that requested speaking time. The High Speaker looked annoyed, but nodded. "The human delegation wishes to address the Assembly." Daniel walked to the central speaking platform. Every eye in the hall turned to watch him. He was a small figure in that vast space, a representative of a species that the galaxy still considered children. But Daniel Morrison was not a child. He was a man who had studied human history, who had walked through the museums of war and genocide, who had sworn an oath to never let such things happen again if he had the power to stop them. He looked up at the assembled galaxy and began to speak. "You have made your choice," he said. "Now I will tell you about ours." The hall fell silent. Something in his voice made even the oldest species pay attention, and what came next would change the galaxy forever. Daniel Morrison stood alone on the speaking platform. The lights of the Grand Assembly Hall pressed down on him from every direction. 847 species watched, some with eyes, some with organs humans had no names for. None of them understood what was about to happen. 200 years ago, Daniel began, his voice steady and clear. "My species nearly destroyed itself. We fought wars over land, over resources, over the color of our skin and the gods we prayed to. We built weapons that could burn cities in seconds. We used them." The translation devices carried his words to every corner of the hall. Some delegates leaned forward with interest. Most looked bored. They had heard human history before. It was a common subject of jokes among the older species. "Millions died," Daniel continued. "Mothers watched their children starve. Fathers buried their sons in mass graves. We stood at the edge of extinction, and we looked into the darkness, and we saw what we had become." He paused. The hall was quiet now, and we made a promise. We said never again. Never again would we stand by while innocents suffered. Never again would we choose comfort over conscience. Never again would we look away because the victims were not our people, because the problem was not our problem, because it was easier to do nothing. Daniel's voice grew harder. "We carved those words into stone. We taught them to our children. We swore oaths in the names of the dead. And today, this assembly has asked us to break that promise." The Zelkari High Speaker shifted in their seat. "Ambassador Morrison, the vote has concluded. Further debate is not permitted." "I am not here to debate," Daniel said. "I am here to announce that the human delegation is invoking Article 7 of the Assembly Charter." Silence. Then a wave of confused murmuring spread through the hall. Article 7 had not been used in over 1,000 years. Most delegates had forgotten it existed. Lavra Bennett stood at the human platform, her hands moving across a communication device. She was transmitting to Earth in real time. Billions of humans were watching this moment. Article 7, Daniel said, grants any member species the right to formally withdraw from the Galactic Assembly. All treaties, trade agreements, and mutual defense pacts are immediately terminated. Now the murmuring became shouts. The Chelik delegation rose to their feet. The Morthani demanded clarification. Even the Zelkari High Speaker looked shocked. "You cannot be serious," the High Speaker said. "Withdrawal would isolate your species. You would lose access to galactic trade networks, advanced technology, military protection. You would be alone." Daniel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We were alone for a very long time, High Speaker. We learned to survive. We learned to fight. We learned to protect each other when no one else would." He turned to face the full assembly. "You have chosen to abandon the beings on the rim. That is your right. But you do not have the right to make us partners in this betrayal. Humanity will not sign its name to a death warrant. Humanity will not profit from the suffering of innocents. Humanity refuses." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. "The formal withdrawal process has begun," Lavra announced from the human platform. A voice carried across the hall. "Earth has ratified the decision. As of this moment, humanity is no longer a member of the Galactic Assembly." On the diplomatic vessel Horizon's Edge, orbiting high above Nexus Prime, Captain Patricia Collins watched the broadcast with tears in her eyes. Her communications officer, Christopher Lane, was already preparing departure protocols. "All hands," Patricia said into the ship's intercom. "Prepare for immediate jump. We're going home." In the assembly hall, chaos had erupted. Smaller delegations were shouting questions. Larger ones were demanding that the humans reconsider. The Zelkari High Speaker was trying to restore order, but no one was listening. Daniel walked back to the human platform. His delegation had already gathered their materials. Kevin Shaw and his security team formed a protective circle around the diplomats. "Ambassador Morrison," a voice called out. It was the representative of the Fanari, a small species from the Rim. Their world was directly in the path of the Varth advance. "What will happen to us?" Daniel stopped. He looked at the Fanari delegate, a being with soft gray fur and large, frightened eyes. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I can tell you what will not happen. Humanity will not forget you. We will not pretend that your suffering does not exist. And if there is anything we can do to help you, we will do it." The Fanari delegate bowed their head. It was a gesture of respect, and also of despair. The human delegation walked toward the great doors of the assembly hall. Their footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. Every species in the galaxy was watching, either in person or through the live broadcast that was spreading across 1,000,000 worlds. Lavra walked beside Daniel. "They're afraid," she whispered. "Look at them." Daniel looked. She was right. The older species, the great powers, they were not angry. They were afraid. They had never seen this before. No species had ever walked away from the assembly. The idea that someone would choose principle over profit was beyond their understanding. At the doors, Daniel paused. He turned back one last time. "We came to the stars hoping to find wisdom," he said. "Instead, we found the same cowardice and cruelty we thought we had left behind. But we also found courage among the small and the weak and the forgotten. We will remember that." The doors opened. The human delegation walked through. The doors closed behind them. And in the grand assembly hall of Nexus Prime, 846 species sat in stunned silence. wondering what they had done. The broadcast spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. On 1,000 worlds, beings watched the humans walk away. Some laughed. Some shook their heads at the foolishness of a young species. But some, the ones who remembered what it felt like to be small and afraid, felt something stir in their hearts. It was a feeling they had almost forgotten. It was called hope. The news spread faster than light itself. Quantum communication networks carried the story to every corner of the galaxy within hours. The humans had walked out. The humans had left the assembly. The humans were alone. On Earth, the reaction was immediate. Emergency sessions convened in every capital. Politicians who had argued for decades suddenly found themselves united. The decision had already been made, ratified in real time as Daniel Morrison spoke. Now they had to decide what came next. In the deep underground chambers of United Defense Command, General Nathan Price stood before a wall of holographic displays. Each one showed a different sector of the galaxy. Red markers indicated Vorth positions. Blue markers showed the scattered human fleet. And between them, in vulnerable green, were the rim worlds that the Assembly had abandoned. Senator Maria Delgado entered the room. She was the chair of Earth's Emergency Council, a woman in her 60s with white hair and a reputation for making hard decisions. She looked at the displays and frowned. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad," General Price replied. "The Vorth have already accelerated their invasion. They know we're isolated. They think we're weak, are we?" Price turned to face her. "We have 42 combat-ready vessels. The Vorth have over 300. Our technology is roughly equal, maybe slightly better in some areas. But numbers matter, Senator. We cannot fight a full-scale war." Delgado nodded slowly. "Then what can we do? We can make them pay for every inch. We can protect specific targets. We can show the galaxy that someone is willing to stand." Price pulled up a new display. "I call it Operation Brightline. We don't try to stop the Vorth everywhere. We pick the most vulnerable worlds and we defend them. We make the cost of conquest so high that even the Vorth have to think twice. And if they don't think twice, then we die trying." Price's voice was flat. "But we die on our feet, not on our knees. That has to count for something." Delgado was silent for a long moment. Then she straightened her shoulders. "Do it. I'll get you the authorization." Across the galaxy, the reaction was very different. The Zelkari sent diplomatic messages to Earth every hour, demanding that humanity return to the negotiating table. The Morthani cut off all trade, hoping economic pressure would force the humans to reconsider. The Chelak simply laughed and began taking bets on how long humanity would survive. Earth's response to all of it was the same: silence. Admiral Cynthia Brooks commanded the Third Fleet, stationed near the border of the Rin territories. She was a tall woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and 30 years of experience in space combat. When the orders came through from General Price, she gathered her captains for a briefing. "We're going in," she said simply. "The Fenari homeworld of Keth 4 is 3 days from falling. Their cities are being bombed. Their people are dying. And nobody in this galaxy is going to help them except us." One of her captains raised a hand. "Admiral, we have 17 ships. Intelligence says there are at least 60 Vorth vessels in that sector." "I know the numbers, Captain." "Then you know this is suicide." Brooks looked at him with steady eyes. "Maybe, but I've been a soldier for 30 years, and I've never once been asked to do something that matters as much as this. The Fenari have done nothing wrong. They just had the bad luck to live on a planet that someone else wanted. They deserve better than to die alone." She pulled up an image on the display. It showed a Fenari city, beautiful towers of glass and growing plants, now burning under Vorth bombardment. "Look at this," she said quietly. Look at what is happening while the galaxy debates trade agreements. Look at what the Assembly decided was acceptable. And then tell me if you want to live in a universe where this is allowed to happen without consequence. The room was silent. We leave in 6 hours, Brooks said. Anyone who wants to stay behind can transfer to a supply vessel. No one will judge you, but I'm going. And I think most of you are coming with me. No one transferred. Not a single officer or crew member. Meanwhile, the Varth Dominion pushed forward with new confidence. Their supreme commander, a massive being covered in dark scales, addressed his fleet with contempt. The humans have abandoned their allies, he said. They have proven themselves to be fools. They think their tiny fleet can stop us? Let them come. We will crush them, and then we will take their precious Earth as well. The galaxy belongs to the strong. His officers roared in approval. But deep in space, moving through the darkness between stars, Admiral Brooks and her 17 ships raced toward Ket 4. They carried with them the hopes of a species that had learned, through blood and fire, that the only thing necessary for evil to triumph was for good beings to do nothing. On the refugee ships fleeing the Rim, Fenari families huddled together and listened to the news broadcasts. Most of the galaxy had already written them off. Most of the galaxy had moved on to other concerns, but there was a rumor spreading. A desperate, impossible rumor that the humans were coming, that no one knew if it was true. No one knew if it would matter. But for the first time in months, the Fenari refugees allowed themselves to feel something other than despair. They felt hope, and hope, as humans had learned long ago, could be the most dangerous weapon of all. The sky above Ket 4 was burning. Varth warships hung in orbit like dark clouds, raining fire on the cities below. In the capital, buildings that had stood for 1,000 years crumbled into dust. In the streets, Fenari civilians ran for shelter that no longer existed. Elder Threshold stood on the balcony of the government building and watched his world die. He was old, his gray fur now white with age, and he had led his people through many difficult times. But he had never imagined this. He had never imagined being abandoned by the entire galaxy. Elder, his aide said, we must evacuate. The Varth ground forces will be here within the hour. And go where? Threshold asked quietly. There is nowhere left to run. Then his aide's communication device beeped. The young Fenari looked at it and froze. Elder, ships have just entered the system. 17 vessels. Threshold turned. Vorath reinforcements? No, Elder. The aide's voice trembled. They're human. Admiral Cynthia Brooks stood on the bridge of her flagship, the New Philadelphia, and looked at the tactical display. The situation was worse than intelligence had predicted. 63 Vorath warships surrounded Ket 4. Her 17 vessels were outnumbered almost 4 to 1. Open a channel, she said. All frequencies. I want everyone to hear this. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Cooper, her tactical officer, nodded. Channel open, Admiral. Brooks took a deep breath. Attention, all vessels. This is Admiral Cynthia Brooks of the Earth Defense Force. We are here under the authority of Operation Brightline. Any attack on civilian populations will be considered an act of war against humanity. Any vessel that continues bombardment of Ket 4 will be engaged and destroyed. This is your only warning. The response came quickly. A harsh, rumbling voice filled the bridge. Human Admiral, you are far from home and you are alone. Your assembly has abandoned you. Your allies have abandoned you. You have no authority here. Withdraw your ships or we will destroy them. Brooks smiled grimly. We didn't come here because we have authority. We came here because you're killing innocent people. So let me make this simple. Stop, or we will stop you. The Varth commander laughed. It was an ugly sound. You have 17 ships. We have 63. Do the mathematics, human. I can count, Brooks replied. But I've also studied your history. You've never fought humans before. You might want to reconsider your confidence. The channel went dead. On the tactical display, the Varth fleet began to move. They were accepting the challenge. All ships, Brooks ordered. Battle formation. Launch fighters. Target their command vessels first. The battle for Keth-4 began on the ground. Sergeant Diana Marsh led her rapid deployment team through the burning streets of the capital. They had dropped from orbit in armored pods, falling through the fire like meteors. Now, they were moving toward the civilian evacuation points, fighting through Varth ground troops who had already landed. Contact left. One of her soldiers shouted that Marsh spun and fired. 2 Varth warriors fell, their scaled bodies crashing to the ground. More were coming. Keep moving, she ordered. The evacuation point is 3 blocks north. We get those civilians to the shuttles, or we die trying. They fought their way forward, block by block, building by building. The Varth were larger and stronger, but the humans were faster and more determined. Every time the aliens thought they had the advantage, the humans did something unexpected. In orbit, the battle raged. Human ships darted between the larger Varth vessels, using speed and precision to overcome raw numbers. The New Philadelphia took hit after hit, her shields failing, her hull breaching in a dozen places. But she kept fighting. Admiral, Cooper reported, we've destroyed 12 enemy vessels. But we've lost 4 ships. The Varth are adapting to our tactics. Brooks gripped the arms of her command chair. Then we adapt faster. Signal the Resolute and the Defender to form up on our port side. We're going straight at their command ship. That's suicide, Admiral. Maybe. Do it anyway. The 3 human vessels charged toward the massive Varth flagship. Enemy fire tore through space around them. The Resolute exploded, then the Defender. But the New Philadelphia kept coming. On the surface, Elder Threshold watched from a shelter as human soldiers carried wounded Fenari civilians toward waiting shuttles. He saw a young human woman, her uniform torn and bloody, lift a Fenari child in her arms and run through enemy fire to reach safety. Why? He asked a human officer who was coordinating the evacuation. Why are you doing this? We have nothing to offer you. We cannot pay you. We cannot help you. Why are you dying for us? The officer, a man with tired eyes and a kind face, looked at him. Because someone has to. Because if we don't, who will? Threshold had no answer for that dot in orbit. Admiral Brooks made her final charge. The New Philadelphia slammed into the Varth flagship at full speed, weapons blazing. The impact tore through both vessels. Fire and debris exploded in the space dot when the light faded. The Varth flagship was dead. And so was the New Philadelphia. But on the surface of Keth-4, the shuttles were launching. Thousands of Fenari civilians, saved from certain death, were rising toward the safety of the remaining human ships. The Varth fleet, bloodied and confused, began to withdraw. They had expected an easy victory. Instead, they had lost their command ship and over 20 vessels. More importantly, they had learned something terrifying. Humans did not fight like other species. Humans did not calculate odds and retreat when the numbers were against them. Humans would charge into certain death if they believed the cause was worth it, and that made them the most dangerous enemy the Varth had ever faced. Across the galaxy, the live footage of the Battle of Keth-4 spread like wildfire. Billions watched as human ships burned. Billions watched as human soldiers died protecting aliens they had never met. And in the halls of the Galactic Assembly, delegates who had voted for abandonment sat in uncomfortable silence, wondering if they had made a terrible mistake. The weeks that followed the Battle of Keth-4 were the hardest humanity had ever faced among the stars. The Varth did not stop. They attacked world after world, and the human fleet, already weakened, raced from system to system trying to protect as many as they could. They could not save everyone. That was the terrible truth. Ships were lost. Soldiers died. Some worlds fell despite everything humanity tried to do. General Price aged 10 years in those weeks, watching the casualty reports come in, sending more young men and women to fight battles they might not survive, but they kept fighting. They never stopped. Stories began to spread across the galaxy. A human medic treating wounded Vorath prisoners with the same care she gave her own people. A human captain refusing to fire on an enemy ship that was evacuating its crew. Human soldiers sharing their food rations with alien refugees who had nothing left. These stories confused the galaxy. This was not how wars were supposed to work. This was not how powerful species behaved. On a dozen worlds, beings who had never met a human began to ask questions. Why were the humans doing this? What did they hope to gain? When would they give up? The answer, when it came, was always the same. They were doing it because it was right. They hoped to gain nothing except the knowledge that they had tried. And they would give up when there was no one left to protect. Slowly, something began to change. The first to break from the Assembly's position were the Talari, a small species whose homeworld had once been conquered and then liberated. They sent 3 ships to join the human fleet. It was not much, but it was something. Then came the Orchith, and the Mindari, and the shallow water singers of Pentax 7, 12 species. Then 20, then 50. Small species, forgotten species, species who remembered what it felt like to be abandoned. The Zelkari High Speaker called an emergency session to address what they called the human crisis. The great powers were losing control. Their careful plans were falling apart. But then something unexpected happened. Elder Threshold of the Fanari, now living on a refugee ship with the survivors of his world, requested permission to address the assembly by hologram. The Zelkari tried to deny the request, but the smaller delegations demanded he be heard. His image appeared in the center of the Grand Assembly Hall, transparent and flickering, but his voice was strong. "I watched my world burn," he said. "I watched my people die. I watched the ships of this assembly turn away because helping us was too inconvenient, too expensive, too risky." The hall was silent, and then I watched 17 human ships enter our system. 17 against 63. They knew they would lose. They knew many of them would die. And they came anyway. His voice broke slightly, then steadied. "I saw a human woman carry a Fanari child through fire. I saw human soldiers die, defending people they had never met, people who could offer them nothing in return. I saw what courage looks like. Real courage. Not the courage of the strong protecting their own, but the courage of beings who choose to stand between the innocent and the darkness, no matter the cost." He looked around the hall, his holographic eyes meeting the gazes of hundreds of delegations. "I have one question for this assembly. One simple question." He paused. "What are we, if we cannot do the same?" The silence stretched for a long moment. Then, in the back of the hall, a single delegate stood. Then another. Then a dozen more. They were the small species, the forgotten ones, the ones who had voted against abandonment from the beginning. But then something remarkable happened. A Chelic delegate stood. Then a Morthani, species that had voted with the majority, species that had chosen safety over principle, began to rise to their feet. The Zelkari High Speaker looked around the hall with growing alarm. "This is highly irregular. There is no motion before the assembly." "Then let there be one," a voice called out. It was the Talari ambassador. "I move for an immediate vote on intervention in the Rim territories. Full coalition. Full commitment." "I second the motion," the Morthani delegate said quietly. The vote was called. And this time, the numbers told a different story. In favor of intervention. 680-7. Against. 160. The motion passed. Across the galaxy, the news spread. The Assembly had reversed its decision. A full coalition was forming. Ships from dozens of species were being mobilized. The Varth Dominion, facing not a handful of human vessels, but the combined might of a united galaxy, agreed to ceasefire negotiations within the week. 1 month later, Daniel Morrison returned to the Grand Assembly Hall. He looked tired. He had not slept properly since the day he walked out of this building. But he walked with his head held high. The Zelkari High Speaker approached him privately, away from the crowds and the cameras. "Ambassador Morrison," they said, "you gambled everything. Your species was alone, outnumbered, outgunned. You could have lost everything." Daniel looked at the High Speaker with calm eyes. "We weren't gambling. Then what were you doing?" "We were remembering." Daniel turned to look out at the Assembly Hall, filling once again with delegates from across the galaxy. "We were remembering every time in our history when good beings did nothing because it was easier, safer, more convenient. We were remembering the price we paid for that cowardice. And we were choosing to be better." The High Speaker was silent for a long moment. "You have changed things," they finally said. "The galaxy will never be the same." "Good," Daniel said. It needed to change. On Keth 4, the rebuilding had begun. Human engineers worked alongside Fanari builders, raising new structures from the ashes of the old. Ships from a dozen species brought supplies and materials. In the center of the capital, there was a memorial. It was not large, just a simple stone with names carved into it. Human names. Cynthia Brooks, the crew of the New Philadelphia, the soldiers who had fallen defending a people they had never known. Every day, Fanari children came to the memorial and placed flowers at its base. They were too young to fully understand what had happened, but they knew one thing. Strangers had come from across the stars and had given their lives so that the Fanari could live. Elder Threshold visited the memorial often. He would stand there for hours, reading the names, remembering the faces. One day, a young Fanari child asked him a question. "Elder, why did the humans help us?" Threshold looked down at the child, then up at the stars. Somewhere out there, human ships patrolled alongside vessels from 50 other species, keeping the peace that had been bought with blood and sacrifice. "Because," he said softly, "that is who they are. That is who they choose to be. And perhaps, if we are very brave, that is who we can become as well." The child nodded solemnly, not fully understanding but sensing the importance of the words. And above them, in the endless darkness between the stars, the galaxy watched humanity not with terror, but with something new, with respect, with gratitude, and with hope.